I can remember in our neighborhood when we would completely do a gut rehab of a house and try to sell it for $25,000, and it would sit. Because of redlining and disinvestment in our neighborhood, people weren't wanting to move into Fishtown, Kensington. You know, they didn't want to. Today, those houses that we begged people to buy for $25,000 could easily sell for $250,000 to $350,000. You know, that's crazy. I mean, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But it's what's happening in neighborhoods like ours, you know, that is undergoing all of this gentrification. And I know there's a number of neighborhoods, I mean, it's not just Fishtown and Kensington that's facing this. Point Breeze is facing it also, as well as Brewery Town, Frankfurt, you know, so there's a lot of this going on. And one of the things that we're doing to try to keep neighbors in the neighborhood is a project called Awesome Town. It's only 14 houses. It's a small project in Fishtown. That houses are selling for between around $450,000. So they started at 400, they're now up to 450. However, 4 of the houses of the 14 are being subsidized by New Kensington CDC. So those houses are sold for $199,000. Now, when you look at them on the records, it's going to look like $400,000 because we're putting the $200,000 into the project. But this is a way for us to keep 4 families at 80% of AMI in the neighborhood. Now, I don't think all these 4 house families are exactly from the neighborhood because we did a lottery. And we had over 150 people show up for this lottery, you know, which shows that people really want to be able to get good quality housing at a reasonable price. And by no means do I think $200,000 is reasonable. You know, I live around the corner from where these houses are being built, and I spent $7,000 on my house, you know. So, again, I've been around for a really long time, right? But, you know, the other thing, you know, that people were talking about was the new AVI. I mean, that is really causing problems in our neighborhood, you know, because people can't afford the taxes. And yes, the city put in a lot of things to try to help. You know, they did homestead. There's a number of things, senior citizen discount and all that. But even with them, you know, if you were paying $900 for taxes, which I was paying $900 for my little house, it is now $3,500. You know, that's crazy. Luckily, I work and I can pay that. But, you know, the lady down the street, you know, who's on a low income Social Security, doesn't have a pension, you know, for her, she's worried that she's going to have to move out of her house because she can't afford to stay there. You know, so we need to do more to keep people who want to stay in these neighborhoods in the neighborhood. One of the other things we did when we did gut rehabs, we did not allow people to get the 10-year tax abatement. And people thought we were crazy for not doing that. But what we were concerned of is that after the 10 years, when they got that tax bill, they weren't going to be able to stay in the house any longer. Because that would just make it so, you know, and everybody always says, oh, you'll get this 10-year tax abatement. You know, 10 years from now, you're going to be making a lot more money. You'll be able to afford it. We didn't believe that, you know, and thank God, because now that's happening, that the taxes have really gone higher. So, you know, it's a difficult thing, as John said. I mean, this isn't an easy issue to deal with, and we're all struggling.
So I wanted to now open up for comments and questions, knowing that we have a commitment that this conversation will continue at another point. I don't know if you can speak loudly or...
Yeah, I can speak. Okay. So I agree that economic racial disparity is a huge, I mean, that's sort of the core of everything. And certainly housing, racist housing policy, banking policy as it relates to real estate practices through the life of our country have been a huge factor in that. So I'm from Habitat, and we build houses is the work we're doing, and we sell them, but the long game is really about economic wealth and growing wealth for families. So I have a question. One thing we've been grappling with is whether to land trust, so that because things are scarce, should we be able to build affordable in perpetuity as things change, and know that we will have as many units out across the city as we can in perpetuity, or is that limiting equity for families who most are black families? So for when, should we not, I mean, shouldn't they be able to benefit when they sell their house? Because so many people in this country, that's how they pull themselves up to a new economic tier. So my question is, what's folks' opinion? I'd especially love to hear your opinions on versus sort of building, our homes let people build wealth too, because the mortgages are so low. But should we be thinking sort of long game, more affordable units across the city, or letting each individual family benefit from the equity? I'm curious. It's something we've seesawed back and forth. So I'd love to hear opinions.
Well, I'll just say, I don't think what you are doing is going to, you can do what you're doing and it won't hurt either way. I mean, the problem is that massive. One of the things that I think that at Universal we're thinking about and pushing for is place-based strategies, so that you can be able to model what we need to model. But it's very difficult. But at the end of the day, you definitely want to transfer, and I think Blaine talked about it so passionately, about the home ownership initiative. So that's very, very important. So whatever you do. But what I've seen also on the home ownership side of things is those soft debt that becomes long-term barriers for resale. And so that's a challenge I've seen using public subsidies for affordable for-sale housing. But I don't think it's nothing that, I think we can continue doing what we're doing as individuals, but as a group, we got to figure out a way to be more effective and scale up strategies that deal with some of the issues that we're dealing with. And this is why we've decided to embark on organizing, at least attempting to organize as best we can, the black community, because it has to be thinking about these things. No one can do for itself, for them, what they must do for themselves. They have to be thinking about these issues. They have to be thinking about their future as a collective. They have to be thinking about themselves. And so the immediate personal gratification that happens has to be tempered by some kind of sense of responsibility to the long-term picture of us and how we got here because of the contributions that people made previously that did that kind of thinking. So it's not all, me, I kind of thing. It is about strategic planning. It is about competing, organizing and competing, and is not the normal competition because unfortunately we're so far behind. But it's still, in order for us to even move, I liken it to a person or a business who's, and if they can stay in business, who's losing annually, $5 million a year, but they're able to make progress because this current year, they're projected to only lose $2 million a year. That's progress. Now, the problem is we have to stay in business while that happens, but the analogy I'm using is that's the measurement we have to take. Unfortunately, we're taking measurements and looking at measurements on the plus side, when in reality, the minus side is so far. So, and that's going to require organized strategies. But the quick answer, I think you should build as much as you can build. Build. Get those houses into the homes of individuals, because at the end of the day, that's still going to matter individually to those families. Have quality housing, affordable, and have some kind of wealth that they can leverage.
Yeah. Very quickly, I can well appreciate the work that your organization does, and the volunteer services. That is a very laudable thing to do, but I think that we need to focus laser-like on the core issue here. And I don't want to stress that, I can't stress that enough, that if the core issue here is race, and I am absolutely convinced that it is, then we need to marshal all resources we can to deal with the racial inequality that we're grappling with. And let me tell you one way that can be done. When you look at the public policies that are pursued by the city government, the state, and the federal government, but let's deal with the city government. I'm very much persuaded by what Mr. Stoddard just said, that if you are aiming toward increasing, or rather reducing, racial disparities in wealth, then the strategy is to promote home ownership. To promote home ownership. Make it possible for people to take advantage of the low interest rates. And by the way, interest rates will probably start rising in September or October this year, if you look at the Federal Reserve. I won't get into that. But the opportunities to have public policies that promote economic advantages and economic progress for people who have been left behind, which is primarily African Americans. And there are public policies that can be developed that are aimed at this objective, eliminating racial inequality, that are not developed with that in the language of it. Because if you put that in the language, you never get it through. But what I'm talking about are public policies that are disproportionately favorable to advancement of African American income, employment, and wealth. And that will then move toward, over time, it's not going to happen overnight, but over time, toward narrowing these disparities, increasing the economic status of African Americans, and in that way, addressing many of the problems that you're talking about in housing, in the quality of education in communities, and in all of the other secondary and tertiary fields of interest that many communities are grappling with. Let me give you one example of this. The New Markets Tax Credit. The New Markets Tax Credit was the last domestic policy developed by the Clinton administration, and I'm proud to say that I was at the table when that policy was developed. The reason the New Markets Tax Credit was developed was because there was political opposition to spending more government money to deal with urban issues, and it was necessary to get the private sector involved. Well, how do you get the private sector involved? By giving them a tax credit for investing in economically distressed communities. I work with the Stonehenge Community Development, which is a financial intermediary, that over the past 4 years has invested more than $100 million in businesses in economically distressed areas. Most of those businesses that were invested in were owned and operated by African Americans. That's not in the law. That is not in the regulations. But the Treasury Department has as one of its goals for these investments measuring the economic impact. So what we do is measure the primary and secondary economic impact of investing in these kinds of communities, and you would be surprised to see what impact investing in these kinds of communities using the New Markets Tax Credit has on employment, on income, and on business ownership. That's the kind of policy I'm talking about, and that the community development people need to broaden the scope of their interests beyond just housing, making affordable housing available, to think of these larger issues and ways of leveraging the power that you have, and you do have power, to develop public policies where the government and the community organizations are aiming at reducing racial disparities. It can be done.
Yeah, I'll just say, in direct answer to your question, I'm more for fee simple ownership for housing to create wealth. We're so far behind that, you know, land banks. I did a land bank up in Allentown, and again, you know, we like where the home, it's a fee simple ownership for the new homeowners. You're going to have the soft second mortgage, but we like the HRP program where the soft second mortgage was forgiven 10% for 10 years. Don't like the 15-year soft seconds where the full soft second subsidy stays on there for 15 years, you know, which is the HUD policy, not the block grant policy. So I like fee simple ownership. Do not like land banks because we're so far behind. We want to put money and equity in the people that are poor.
Land trust.
Land trust, I'm sorry, land trust.
So, so I think here in the United States, we have a love for real estate and for home ownership. And I really am interested in really bringing the facts to the table and really exploring whether really home ownership is the best way to build wealth in minority communities. Because there's other ways of investing capital. They are more esoteric in the sense that a house, you live in it while you're creating supposedly wealth, right? But the truth is that minorities, people with low income, where they can afford to buy a house or where housing opportunities are located, are not in the best neighborhoods. So many times, a person of low income may be better off renting in a better neighborhood so that they can get the amenities and the resources, and Blaine did that, right? Then Blaine go to Ardmore because you would have the resources there available to you at the price that you can afford, right? So really, you know, I sometimes, and this is a question, I don't have the answer necessarily because I would have to do a lot of reading and perhaps I need to do it. But the question is, are minority low wealth residents better off buying affordable housing in the neighborhoods in which that housing is available? Or are they better off investing and building wealth in other ways that we're not as familiar with, right? And these are ways in which, again, your business models, which are based on building housing, are not necessarily set up to do. So these are questions that I think if we really want to erase this economic disparity, we need to really look into.
I know as a moderator, I'm not supposed to chime in too much, but let me put some 2 cents in here. I do think actually the discussion has been about there are not enough opportunities to build wealth and to build income in low-income minority, mostly African-American communities here in Philadelphia. I used to work at Community Legal Services. I represented low-income tenants, but a lot of my colleagues represented low-income homeowners. And it's vacillated through the years, but for many years their answer was no, homeownership isn't necessarily the answer for people. First of all, you get a home and it's got a leaky roof, and then it's got a flooding basement, and it's got various other things that people cannot afford to fix. You guys know this more than anything. I was also always surprised to hear their stories of the inherited house. So you have the granddaughter who now has grandmom's house, and her mortgage payment, because she got a second mortgage on the house, is only $200 a month, which for various reasons she has fallen behind on, $200 a month. Well, when I started at CLS in 1998, you could rent a small single-room occupancy space, you know, in various parts of the city for about $350 a month. Sometimes you had to share a bathroom, sometimes you had your own. They don't exist anymore. Although my side job, I have two jobs. I also run the city's Fair Housing Commission. Since 2008, we have seen many, many illegal rooming houses. And whether it's a large-scale rooming house or somebody who just converted their basement, threw a mattress down there and started renting that out because of the recession, we've seen a lot of that as well. So it's an interesting phenomenon to tell people, you're going to lose your house, that your mortgage is $200, $300, maybe $400 a month, but you can't rent for that out on the private market anymore. And as we all know, in the Housing Authority, those were my clients, the waiting list was 10 and 12 years long. And you're not getting off of that list as well. So I do think, I come back to everything that we're saying, because there is a holistic model here, right? One, we have to get to the root cause of why someone can't afford $200 a month on a mortgage. We have to get to the root cause of why she can't afford $300 a month on a mortgage. That is the issue. We can build as much affordable housing as we want, but we really do need to, I think all things happen at the same time, by the way, because I do think we need to continue. You guys are doing great jobs and need to continue providing all of the opportunities that you are. But if you, as a collective body with the minds in this room, could also get behind the issues of education, making sure that every single neighborhood school is a good school that you can send your kids to, that there's fresh food in neighborhoods, that there's proper lighting, that when you call the police, they come as quickly as they would in any single neighborhood and give you the same services that you would in any neighborhood in the city. That's what this is all about. I just pulled together over 200 young people last week who all talked about trying to improve the relationship between young people and the police. And a lot of what they said is they want the police in their neighborhoods to be more of their partners. They want to know when they call 911 that the police would come out even quicker. And this is all the larger issue of making sure there's equality in every single neighborhood in every block of the city.
I want to just also say something. I was just thinking about how things are perceived. And one of the things I wanted to make clear, poverty is bad for everybody. And so we should be aligned on the issue of anti-poverty campaign across the board. It's just very difficult to live and you don't have enough resources. And as Dr. Anderson said, it is an economic issue. What I'm trying to convey for the Black community specifically is the structural nature of the poverty and how the number of catch-22s that make it almost nearly impossible to escape. But we have to be able to escape. And I think we can get, if we do this strategically, the comprehensive model is one that Universal pushes and promotes. Again, that's why we push and want to practice a place-based strategy, because we have to create this model we're talking about. But when we can have alliances with those who believe in a fairer, more equitable America, because I think that that whole 1% campaign, 1%ers, that was moving in the right direction, because just a few people have the majority of the wealth in the country, and it's just not good it's not a good business model for America. And we also say that for 45 million people, with nearly 2/3 of them in poverty, or near poverty, or at poverty, is not a good business model for America. And to incarcerate them at a clip of, representing, if you look at the male population of roughly 4% of the population, but representing almost 60% of the prison population. There's nothing in the world. We're sitting here, we got apartheid times 10, and no one said anything. But it's impacting, it's crippling the economic ability to achieve economic equality. It's crippling, because many of those young men are unable to provide for their families. They're having children, but they're unable to provide for their children in the way that most of the men in this room do for their families. And we don't even know, we just take this for granted because we've been able to. But, you know, I see so many black men in that 50% category. It's probably even higher because they're not counted, because they have left the system completely and they're operating in an underworld kind of environment. They gotta, some kind of way, you need money. So the bottom line, poverty is poverty, and it cripples everybody. I think the African American community has a unique situation because it was made to be impoverished by America, the policies of America, by the political policies of America, by the institutions of America, purposely. It wasn't until 1960 that we got any kind of civil rights or equal rights or fair housing rights were designed to reverse 400, almost 500 years of brutal treatment to black people. So that climate and culture still exists. Those laws have been, all of those laws have been undermined. And so we are where we are, but I wanted to make sure clear that I am anti-poverty for all people, but I'm also focused on the conditions, the unique conditions of the black community.
Kind of wanted to shift the conversation because we were talking about economics and tools of how building houses. We're talking about community economic development, community. For me, I'd like to interject the term of sovereignty. You know, we don't talk about sovereignty, the absolute right of the people to rule themselves and determine what their community is going to look like. You brought up Chestnut Hill. Chestnut Hill has sovereignty. That community determines their conversation that you guys are having. You talk about what we don't want. They talk about what they want. In a different terminology, the police know they have to serve the community there. That's sovereignty. I would also posit that you have another example of Penn. Penn has sovereignty. They self-identify. You went to Penn, you're in Penn. You go there, that is a value proposition. They buy up the land, they develop the land. Columbia does it, Harvard did it, Yale is doing it. They all do it, right? The only other group that I know of that's a minority group that's as distressed as all of the groups here is the Native Americans that we don't talk about, right? They have the worst numbers across the country of incarceration, abuse, lack of just plumbing, all right? And nobody talks about it. When they became gaming tribes, say you had the whole issue that you had all the money in the world to solve your problems. The number one problem they had to tackle was sovereignty. So my question to the panel is, what's your take on the self-determination of each community to say what's going to happen in my community?
Well, I would say to you that your example of the Native Americans is the downside of sovereignty. Aren't they considered separate nations within America?
Yes.
So they have sovereignty, yet look at where they are.
By
So
design.
what's the solution to that?
But by design, until they had an economic
By
model.
design, are you suggesting that they want to be in the dreadful
No, I'm saying the
condition
U.S. government, by design, through policies, have kept them that way.
So what changed their conditions? Casinos.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Casinos.
An economic drive.
That was a public policy decision to allow Indians, Native Americans, to have casinos, and they are changing the face of some communities in Chula, Mississippi, which is 30 miles from Memphis, Tennessee. That was one of the poorest counties in the United States of America before they opened a Native American casino. Now that is the highest income county in the state of Mississippi. There you have the impact of public policy that can turn things around rather quickly. Now, maybe we need, following your example, have neighborhoods in Philadelphia, various neighborhoods, given sovereignty, say Nicetown, so that they then can have a casino. or slot machines or something like that. I mean, that's ridiculous. But the point is that let's when we think about these issues, let's look at basics, root cause, the nature of the